time to every purpose under the heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to get and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. What profit hath he that worketh in that wherein he laboureth? I have seen the travail which God hath given to the sons of men to be exercised in it. He hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also he has set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. I know that there is no good in them, but for a man to rejoice and to do good in his life. And also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. I know that whatsoever God doeth, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it, nor anything taken from it. And God doeth it, that men should fear before him. That which hath been is now, and that which is to be hath already been, and God requireth that which is past. Moreover, I saw under the sun the place of judgment, that wickedness was there, and the place of righteousness, that iniquity was there. I said in mine heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. I said in mine heart concerning the estate of the sons of men, that God might manifest them, and that they might see that they themselves are beasts. For that which befalleth the sons of men befalleth beasts, even one thing befalleth them. As the one dies, so dieth the other. Yea, they have all one breath. So that a man hath no preeminence above a beast, for all is vanity. All go unto one place, all are of the dust, and all turn to dust again. Who knoweth the spirit of man that goeth upward, and the spirit of the beast that goeth downward to the earth? Wherefore I perceive that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his portion. For who shall bring him to see what shall be after him? So in verse 1 it begins, to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. And I want us to look briefly at what we've already learned, because Solomon is developing a train of thought here. And sometimes if we get too focused on details, we lose track of that train of thought. And some of the things that we have learned thus far, we have learned that a life lived simply for the gratification of the flesh, that is, those things under the sun, is most futile. Chapter 1, verses 2 and 3 said, Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit hath a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? And where he doubles that, vanity of vanities. It is a construction of speech, and it basically means most futile. You know, the idea of vanity is it's empty. It's of little or no worth. And so when he says vanity of vanities, it's like most futile. It's like when they use the phrase there, there's the holy place and the holy of holies, or the most holy, or holiest of all. And when it doubles up like that. And so vanity of vanities, most futile, we see here. We have learned Solomon, as we look at it, what he says, had not learned to restrain his desires, chapter 2, verse 10, said, whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy. And my heart rejoiced in all my labor. And this was my portion of all my labor. And this is one of the things that as we go through here, we need to observe and understand where Solomon is coming from. And again, it's what he observes under the sun versus what is done for the glory of God. That which is done for the gratification of the flesh is vain, it is empty, it is unprofitable. So when Solomon reflected on all he had accomplished, he felt it was empty and unprofitable. Verse 11, then I looked at all the works of my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. And all the supposed pleasures of life, he found no satisfaction. As believers, our accomplishments for God are a testimony of Him to the world. But the times when the flesh is not restrained will result in a reproach on the cause of Christ. And we see in Solomon's life, because he failed to restrain those desires, he came short of what he could have accomplished. And God rebuked him for it, that he had not walked as his father David had walked, and the kingdom would be taken from him, but not in his lifetime, for David's sake, but in his son's lifetime. So we see then that man should live his life to the fullest. Verse 224, as he sums up here, there is nothing better for a man that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. So also I saw that it was from the hand of God. And so what he's saying here is not the hedonistic philosophy of eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. This was kind of the philosophy of the farmer there in the Gospel of Luke, who said, had a great harvest. And he said, I said to my soul, I've got much here, I'm going to tear down the barns I have, build bigger barns, and where I can store all my this bounty, and then I can sit back and take my ease and eat, drink, and be merry. And God said, thou fool. Paul made the comment in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, said, if in this life only we have hope in Christ, that is, that which is under the sun, said, we're of all men most miserable. He talked about, said, if there is no resurrection of the dead, if there's no life after this, then said we might as well do like the gladiators and all those that fight in the arena, that we eat, drink, and today, because tomorrow we're going to die. And so that was kind of their philosophy. And so Paul says, if this life is it, then that's what we ought to do. But he goes on to point out that is not all there is to this life. There is a resurrection of the dead. And there is more to life than that which is under the sun. And so Solomon acknowledges here that he's suggesting that men should keep the pleasures that he enjoys in his life in perspective with his responsibility to God, remembering that all things that come about as a result of the fulfillment of fleshly desires are vanity. But we see that if a man works diligently, acknowledging that God's hand is on his life, he will be blessed. And the key is to do all to the glory of God. And so we see here, this was from the hand of God. Ecclesiastes 7:18. He said, "It is good that thou shouldst take hold of this, yea, also from this withdraw not thy hand, for he that feareth God shall come forth of them all." So we read here in chapter 3, verses 12 and 13, "I know that there is no good in them, but for a man to rejoice and do good in his life. And also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God." Chapter 5, verse 18, "Behold, that which I have seen, it is good and comely for one to eat and to drink and to enjoy the good of all his labor, that he taketh under the sun all the days of his life, which God giveth him, for it is his portion." So we see that he's acknowledging here that this is God's portion to us in this life. And we are to acknowledge God's hand upon our life. And when we restrain our desires for the gratification of the flesh and balance that with our accountability to God and responsibility to God, God will bless our lives. Only in this can we enjoy the fruit of our labor and experience joy under the sun. And this is Solomon's recurring theme, as we will see, and we've actually touched upon already through here, and it's a recurring theme that this is God's gift to us, His grace, that we might enjoy the fruits of our labors. But that is also balanced with our responsibility and accountability to God. And we might say here, sometimes people say, well, God created us like this, and, with our senses and things, why not? Well, He created us upright without sin, and man fell. We are accountable and responsible to God, and just because we're able to do something doesn't mean we ought to do something. And He did create us to feel joy, to enjoy things, but we are responsible and need to restrain that gratification of the senses and bring it in submission to God's will and how He has instructed us as the intention for those things, that He might bless us. So now we come to chapter 3. And we've read here, and the first 8 verses, and let us just read verse 1 and then sum up these first 8 verses. "To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven." Now Solomon points out that the true purpose, and remember how he's looked at this, what is the purpose of man? What profit is there in all the labor and things that we do? And so there was a kind of a seeking of some meaning and purpose in life. And so he points out here that the true purpose and profit in our labors under the sun can only be found in the fulfillment of God's sovereign will and purpose. He's pointing out here that God is sovereign in all that He does. God has purposed some things. And so He said, for everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heavens. And here He doesn't say under the sun, He says under the heavens. And so the perspective shifts a little bit here. That God has a purpose in all these things. And while, there are many things in our lives may appear to us to be unprofitable, to be vain, because the things that he notes here under the sun. But he's also acknowledging here that God has a purpose in all things. There's much in the world that is changing. And Solomon had trusted in those things which he thought provided him with security. And it's interesting, that's one of the things, one of the basic needs that people feel is to feel secure. And many times we look to the material things to make us feel secure. If I have enough money in the bank, if I own my home and it's paid for, and so on and so forth, then we feel more secure. But even if we have money in the bank, even if we own the home and it's paid off, and we don't owe anything else, there's still no security in that. It can all still be taken away. And that which he thought provided him with security, what he discovers is that there is no one who keeps the world, that there is one who keeps the world in order, and that is God. He is the one who causes all things to happen in their season and gives to everything its purpose. And so our security is not in those things under the sun. Our security is in He who inhabits heaven, as in God who has created all things. All things are created by Him and for Him, and He has a purpose. And in Isaiah, one of my favorite portions of Scripture, Isaiah 46, verse 9 says, "Remember the former things of old." And think back and remember the things that have happened in the past. And so we see how this corresponds to what Solomon has been saying here. Those things have happened. There's nothing new under the sun. What has happened today has already happened in the past. It'll occur again in the future. And so there's nothing new under the sun. And so here Isaiah, God is speaking through Isaiah and says, now remember what I've done in the past. Remember how I've operated in the past, all the things I have done. He says, for I am God, and there is none else. I am God, and there is none like me. And so he expresses the power that he is the Almighty, he is the All-Knowing, he is the All-Wise. And so he points out here that declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times the things that are not yet done. And so he has a time for these things. Back here in the past, he has declared that at a certain time that hasn't come yet, something's going to happen. And so, how many times in the Scriptures we read said, as he spake, so and so happened, or Jesus in the fullness of time, the time appointed, and so on. We read those statements. God had purposed things to happen, and He's purposed a time for them to happen. And so that's what He's saying here, that there's a time for every purpose. There's a season for everything and a time for every purpose under the heaven. Declaring the end from the beginning, from ancient times, the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. Calling a ravenous bird from the east, the man that executes my counsel from a far country. Yea, I have spoken it, I will also bring it to pass. I have purposed it, I will also do it. And so he's saying, look, that which I have purposed to do, I have the power to bring it to pass. Now, some have likened that God in His omniscience is able to look down through time and see everything that's going to happen. But it's not just that He sees what's going to happen. He has purposed what is going to happen. And so we read in Acts 15:18, he says, known unto God are all His works from the foundation of the world. God knows what He has purposed. And He said, I've purposed it, I'm going to do it. And so He's purposed it, then He spoke it, He said He was going to do it, and ultimately He's going to bring it to pass just like He said. In Romans 8:28, we read, all things work together for good to them that love God, who are the called according to His purpose. Again, we see that word purpose. Now, all things work together. And so, as we read here in Ecclesiastes Chapter 3, verse 1, to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. And he goes through to list these things, usually pairs of contrasting, a time to be born, a time to die. And so God has purposed when we would come into this world. He has purposed who our parents were. He has purposed our grandparents and so on. Our genetic makeup, our DNA has been purposed of God to make us the individual that we are. And our time that we're to be here, it's already purposed. So there's a time, everything, a season, a time to every purpose under the heaven. Time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up that which is planted, and so on. He goes through all of these things. And so the idea is, it's not in man to be able to know all these things. That's what he brings out in verse 9 through 15. Verse 11 said, He had made everything beautiful in His time. Also He has set the world in their hearts, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. We're never going to know, our finite minds in our brief lifetime, we're never going to comprehend enough, learn enough to know everything that God's going to do. We are not able to determine what all God has planned just for our lifetimes, much less to the end of time. And there will be an end of time. He has purposed it. He has declared it in His Word. This heavens, this earth will pass away, and everything that in them is, and that's one of the reasons that everything, under the sun, because even the sun itself, this sun's going to pass away. The heavens and the earth, and everything is going to pass away. It's going to burn up. And so everything that's in it and done it is vain, it's empty, it's unprofitable, in that it's not going to last forever. And so, much less are we able to determine what all is going to happen in our lifetime. We don't know those things. And so the only alternative for man, since he cannot see the end, is to trust in God. God has purposed all this. He has a time, and so as we look back now at he says the futility of the unrestrained gratification, the futility of all this labor, all this work that man potentially can do. Ultimately, it's empty, it's unsatisfying, it is unprofitable, it is in vain, it'll all pass away. You're going to pass away, you can't take it with you, it's going to be left for another, and so on. And we do not know what all is going to happen. There's so many things we have no control over. So ultimately, man must learn to trust God for everything. And that's what he's saying here, verse 9 through 15. He said, I know, verse 12, that there is no good in them, but for a man to rejoice and do good in his life. He said, do good. And God has determined and purposed what is good for man. And here again, we need to restrain our desires and the gratification of our desires and bring ourselves into submission to His will. And to do that which is right and good in His sight. To do that which is just and right. That every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. You know, it is the gift of God. He says, I know that whatsoever God doeth, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it, nor anything taken from it. For God has purposed. He said, I said it, I'm going to bring it to pass. I purposed it, I'm going to do it. And Solomon's acknowledging that which God does, it is permanent. There's no changing it. There's no altering it. And so he says, that men should fear before Him. And so that's what we need to do. We need to put our trust in God. Fear God, keep His commandments, do that which is good in the sight of God. Then, beginning with verse 16, he says, and moreover I saw under the sun the place of judgment. That is, in this life and among men, where judgment is supposed to take place. As we said before, there are those within each town, within each village, there were those elders, there are those who are princes, those that are appointed as overseers and so on, to whom people look to render a right judgment, to render justice, to be just in their dealings, to do that which is right. That's what he's talking about here, the place of judgment. That wickedness was there. Instead of righteousness, instead of righteous judgment, he said there was wickedness. In other words, people take bribes. People will render a false judgment to curry the favor of someone that's powerful. Or they will pervert judgment because they fear someone that is powerful and they don't want to upset them and get them mad and so on. And so he says, in the place of judgment, that wickedness was there. In the place of righteousness, that iniquity was there. And so he's saying there was injustice in the world. Now, how many times you hear people say, well, if there was really a God, and He's this holy God, He's this love, why does He allow injustice? Why does He allow hunger? Why does He allow the suffering? You know, I find it ironic that many times the same people get upset when you talk about the sovereignty of God. But what about man's free will? Injustice is here because men have sinned against God. The injustice is here because of what man does, not because of what God did. God created man upright, without sin. But He created man mutable. That is, man could change. He was not a God. He is mutable, and therefore subject to change, and could change. And He did. He disobeyed God. He fell. And so sin entered the world by one man, and death by sin. So the injustice the suffering. All of these things that we see in the world is the result of man's sin, and is a part of that vanity and futility that we see in the world. In this world there is injustice and tribulation. John 16:33. Gospel of John, chapter 16, verse 33. He says, "These things I have spoken unto you, that in me ye might have peace. In the world ye shall have tribulation. But be of good cheer, I have overcome the world." See, in this world there is tribulation. In this world there is suffering. In this world there is injustice under the sun. So what man should seek out of this life is to restrain his passions, acknowledge God's hand in his life, enjoy the fruits of his labor, and trust in God and do good. For God will judge all things. Verse 17, he said, "I said in mine heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked. For there is a time there for every purpose and for every work." And so again, that which he was talking about in the beginning, he comes back to. There is a time of judgment. It's appointed unto man once to die, and after this, the judgment. God is going to bring everything into judgment. All else is vanity and vexation of spirit. And so he says, kind of in summing this up, there's a time for everything, a purpose for everything under the sun. God is sovereign. And we cannot understand all these things. That which we do in this